Hints, tips, truths and myths. I have long thought that one of the secrets to living a successful life is learning to recognize opportunities when you stumble over them, and having the courage to seize them before they pass by. Life is a series of choices often veiled from our immediate recognition, or choices we disregard because our logical mind, our fears, the fears of our family and friends, our inhibitions or, more tragically, our childhood conditioning get in the way of our inbuilt natural antennae. When our gut instinct is to make a positive move towards someone or something, we are often our own worst enemies, holding ourselves back from seizing the moment and its opportunities that are just waiting to be recognized, grabbed, nurtured and fulfilled, opportunities that ultimately allow us to realize our dreams. Balance. Used in the right way, dowsing can help us negotiate the plethora of choices and identify what might or what might not be in our best interests. It can provide invaluable guidance, shining light onto seemingly impossible dilemmas. It can help us hone our decision-making abilities and sharpen our ability to spot opportunities from the many choices that come our way. It can also help us differentiate between genuine openings and false leads, thereby helping us to shape and determine the quality and path of our life. How? In two important and compatible ways. First, we can use dowsing to ask direct questions about the options we have available to us, which might be in our best interests to pursue and which we should quietly leave behind. Second, the more you use dowsing, the more your confidence will grow from having your initial intuitive response, hunches and gut feelings confirmed on an ongoing and consistent basis by its more tangible process. The more your confidence grows, the more you will learn to trust that still, small voice within. And the more you learn to trust it, the more audible and resonant that small voice will become. But which way is the right way? Is it really in our best interests to use dowsing to make everyday decisions? Are we not in danger of overusing it, thus inhibiting and hampering the development of our natural reasoning, discernment and common sense? Many self-appointed spiritual teachers counsel against using dowsing too often and for all modes of life. However, life is about balance, and dowsing is no different. Remember, you are not abdicating responsibility to some outside source or authority when you dowse. You are simply, and naturally, accessing a field of infinite intelligence that is, at one and the same time, within you and to which you are connected. And in this way, you will only be enhancing your intuitive faculties by constant application and confirmation. Even so, I believe the best advice is to exercise judgment and discretion as to how, and how often, you apply your dowsing ability. Do not become a slave to it, not making a move before you have consulted your dowsing tool. In essence, it is important to succeed by your own efforts in life, but it is also perfectly in order to apply the dowsing faculty to complement these efforts. In his book Science and Human Transformation, Professor William Tiller describes dowsing as a device similar to training wheels and includes it on the list of aids that help us to fulfill our journey of evolution of consciousness. He says,
when our own body's structural organization at physical and subtle levels has reached the point where it has attained a high level of geometrical, radiation type, radiation frequency, and radiation amplitude discrimination for both receiving and sending, then these particular training wheels are no longer needed, and they can be dispensed with. Until that graduation day, they are useful in that they enhance our present capabilities. Of course, it is also important to remember that one can become chained to a crutch by failing to exercise without it.
The process of being a dowser is an ongoing process of self-development. In time, you will reach a point when you will just know when it is appropriate to use your dowsing faculty and when it is unnecessary. A dowsing student of mine once expressed surprise that we were allowed to dowse on personal information for ourselves. As we have already seen, of course we are allowed. But if you are not sure if it is appropriate to dowse on a question, just ask. May I have access to this information? May I have permission to dowse on this subject? Is it in my best interests to dowse on this topic? Your dowsing tool will soon let you know whether it is an appropriate question or subject to ask about. You might receive an answer, or your dowsing tools might stubbornly refuse to move in any direction, and no amount of questioning or rephrasing of the questions will coax them into action. But remember, as Father Jean Durian discovered many years ago, dowsing works best when there is an explicit need. For example, you wouldn't douse when you woke up every morning on what to wear that day. However, you might consider dowsing on the choice of a specific outfit for an important interview by asking if it would create a favorable impression on a prospective employer. Similarly, once you have used dowsing to identify the basics of a healthy and nutritious diet, you wouldn't, under normal circumstances, then douse on every morsel of food that passed your lips. You might, however, use dowsing to determine whether the few sad leftovers in the fridge had deteriorated to the point of being detrimental to your health, or whether the sell-by or use-by date on an item did actually mean that it was no longer fit for human consumption. Or, after a stomach upset, you might use dowsing to determine which foods, if any, would promote the optimal restoration of your health. I even use dowsing to calibrate films before viewing, either on a scale of 1 to 10 for the entertainment or educational value, or on Dr. David Hawkins' scale for the level of consciousness and truth. This has invariably saved me time, money, and unwanted exposure to the low level of energies that deplete and dull our senses, suppress our immune systems, and deaden our spiritual sensitivity. And, as Dr. Hawkins points out, just the act of being in the presence of higher energy consciousness has a profound effect on our energy and level of consciousness. The more we expose ourselves to and align ourselves with the higher levels of consciousness of beauty, truth, and unconditional love, the more we will raise our own energetic vibrational rate. The reverse is just as true. So, if you use your dowsing responsibly and with discernment, you will not only optimize your opportunities of honing your intuitive skills, but also of enhancing the quality of your life. More profoundly, dowsing's wonderful gift of insight into the truth of any situation, experience, or reality gives us a unique opportunity to choose the consciousness with which we surround ourselves and, in turn, to evolve through ever higher levels of consciousness and awareness. Dowsing for the future. The question of whether it is possible to douse for the future has always been controversial. In my own experience, the answer would be yes, you can, but before I get jumped on by those who believe that the future cannot be predicted by any means, I will firmly qualify this with a couple of caveats. The only way to douse reliably for future events is by determining possibilities, probabilities, potentialities, and trends. Although I personally suspect that there are some events that are predestined in our lives, especially when we have spiritual assignments to fulfill, most of the future is set not in stone but as a series of choices and potentialities. In our world, free will is paramount, and the outcome of any future happening will always be affected by the choices and decisions of those involved in the given scenario. If those choices and decisions have not yet been made, the outcome will not yet be definitive. So, if you decide to douse on the future, my advice would be realistic. Your questions would be most sensibly phrased along the lines of taking everything into consideration. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that? This way of posing the question will be far more likely to give helpful guidance that can be used in a constructive manner. And check whether your answer is the possibility of something coming about or the probability. A probability is more definite than a possibility. A further way of asking would be to determine the potential of something happening, given all causal factors involved. The second caveat regards timing. Albert Einstein once said, "Time is not at all what it seems. It does not flow in only one direction, and the future exists simultaneously with the past. Our interpretation of time is subjective and incomplete. Mounting scientific evidence suggests that it is far removed from the neatly ordered linear progression that we perceive it to be. As all time is relative, pinning down timing is notoriously difficult. So, when dowsing, you need to make allowances for this perceived human measurement of reality and phrase your questions accordingly. It is far better to ask for a time scale, rather than specific dates, giving yourself plenty of leeway and wide margins, and regularly reaffirming your answers right up until the event. In my own experience, dowsing for the future has always brought about helpful guidance. In early 2008, one was told through Dowsing that the pound sterling to euro exchange rate was going to reach parity in the near future. At that time, the pound was strong, with an average value of euro 1.45, so this information appeared to be, quite frankly, ridiculous. I rechecked my answers. Still a definite yes, but when unable to pin down the timing, I assumed this was due to too many variables in the global economy. 10 short months later, and to the shock of the majority of people, the pound and euro did indeed achieve parity for the first time since the single European currency was launched. More recently, I was due to fly to the Middle East on a business trip. Unfortunately, the trip was cancelled, but having already booked the non-refundable tickets, I had the choice of whether to still use them by taking a short holiday to the same location instead. I decided to dowse for guidance. The answer was an unequivocal no. Naturally, it was very disappointing, but I have learned to trust the information and follow it. On the 2nd of February 2009, the morning I was due to fly, London woke up to sudden heavy snowfall, Heathrow Airport was under several inches and all long-haul flights were grounded. In excess of 800 flights were cancelled, resulting in severe disruption for 3 days, with passengers queuing for up to 10 hours and sleeping on the airport terminal floor. Not a good way to start a short holiday. I was grateful, to say the least. But keep in mind that often it is not in our best interests to be party to future information. The bigger picture is often obscured to protect us. There have been instances where I have been asked by one partner, in the absence of the other, about the state or the future potential of the relationship. This, in anyone's estimation, is a delicate path to tread. Which leads us to privacy and permission. Privacy and permission. It frequently comes as a great comfort to clients and students alike to hear that when dowsing on personal issues, we are usually denied access to any information that might be deemed an unwanted or unnecessary intrusion, or an unwarranted invasion of privacy. In fact, I would go further and state that I believe there to be a universal data protection scheme in place. Working with a client at her home one day several years ago, I successfully determined the causative factors behind her compromised health and those behind the poor health of her young daughter and baby who, at the time of the consultation, were being cared for at a neighbor's house. She was delighted. So delighted, in fact, that she asked if I would identify the causative factors behind her husband's long-standing psoriasis. He too was absent, at work for the day. I told her I would ask to see if it would be possible. The answer, from Dowsing, was a very definite no. As I had been able to access the critical information for her children, both of whom were absent, my client was surprised and disappointed. Why, therefore, could I not do the same for her husband? I explained that accessing this information could be seen as an invasion of his privacy and I would need his permission to do this. Later, at home, out of curiosity I dowsed on the main reasons for not being able to access the information to help her husband. It was revealed that one of the main causative factors behind his psoriasis was a significant psychological issue from his childhood, which he had not shared with his wife. Revealing this information to any person other than the husband himself would have constituted an unwarranted invasion of privacy and thus at the time I was not allowed access. The information, and his unwillingness or inability to share it with his wife, could potentially have changed the dynamics of their relationship and could possibly have been damaging to their marriage. Whether, in the long term, this change would or would not have been ultimately beneficial is immaterial. It was simply not in my remit, nor had I been given the authority to initiate this process. This is just one example of many cases where access to information has been denied. The most important thing we can take from this is that when our dowsing does not reveal the information we request, we must not automatically assume that this is some failure on our part. There is usually a very good reason why, which we must learn to trust and accept. I, for one, am happy to leave the decisions of where or when it is appropriate to help to the vastly superior infinite intelligence of the universe. In my own practice, specifically in the health field, denial of access to necessary information may denote that, in that particular instance, I cannot interfere with an individual's recovery, current health treatment, life path, karma, or personal growth. Alternatively, it may be that even though they have approached me for a consultation, ultimately the information I give them, or perhaps the process of obtaining that information, when it comes to the crunch, would be outside their belief system. They would therefore reject it as having no value. An awareness of the dowsing process and all its implications regarding the fundamental interconnectedness of the universe is not only a journey of evolution in consciousness for the dowser concerned, it will also be part of the journey of the client or subject. And although for some, witnessing the dowsing process can be a revelatory and positive life-changing experience, for others it can be just the reverse. There are those who are simply not ready to be open to extrasensorial processes, and dowsing may result in an uncomfortable full-on challenge to deeply held core belief systems. Any process of personal enlightenment or expansion of awareness cannot be engendered or forced, but only allowed to unfold in a timely manner. Above all, I have learned to never, ever step in and help where it has not been requested. It is perfectly in order to make others aware of your dowsing abilities and field of speciality and expertise, but a request for help should always be initiated by the other party. This will help avoid potentially frustrating and embarrassing situations further down the line. And for your own clarity of mind, it is wise to give well-grounded thought to your motivation, intent and aims before starting out dowsing, whether on a personal basis or in a professional capacity. Truth. Dr. David A. Hawkins states, "Truth is whatever is subjectively convincing at one's current level of perception." When asked about the reality of eternal truth in his book The Eye of the Eye, he responds by saying, "Begin by accepting the very important statement that all truth is subjective. Do not waste lifetimes looking for an objective truth, because no such thing exists. Even if it did, it could not be found except by the purely subjective experience of it. All knowledge and wisdom are subjective. Nothing can be said to exist unless it is subjectively experienced." For dowsers and seekers of truth alike, both these statements could be disconcerting. But what is important for us as dowsers to understand is that all truth is subjective, so it can only be relevant truth when it is properly in context. We can only experience truth within the limited context of our sphere of knowledge, understanding and awareness. And as greater and more expansive spheres of knowledge will always exist, all truth, therefore, is relative. On how many occasions have we believed something fervently and deeply, only for an extra fact or piece of knowledge to emerge that radically changes the context of our understanding and leads us to conclude, "Oh well," that throws a completely different light on things. Whilst refining our questioning technique, we saw the importance of having an awareness of the bigger picture and also differentiating between opinions and facts. Undeniably, simple facts exist. It is not a subjective truth that the current monarch of Great Britain is Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This fact is easily verifiable. And bigger facts are verifiable too. Or are they? Author, spiritual teacher and visionary Eckhart Tolle gives us this pertinent example from his book A New Earth. As an illustration of relative and absolute truth, consider the sunrise and sunset. When we say the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, that is true, but only relatively. In absolute terms it is false. Only from the limited perspective of the observer on or near the planet's surface does the sun rise and set. If you were far out in space, you would see that the sun neither rises nor sets, but that it shines continuously. Several years ago, the renowned English specialist paint manufacturer Farrow and Ball brought out a color chart containing solely white paints named off-whites. At a quick glance, the chart initially appeared to be another fashion fad: white is the new black. Rather than coming close to resembling shades of white, the color samples looked more like varying shades of gray, taupe, pale pink, blue and beige in relation to the background of the pure white chart. And herein lies the key. The colors had been inspired by the whites found in historic houses, whites tempered and aged with the patina of time, which had been developed for conservation and restoration projects. The color swatch named off-white, which appeared in the chart to be a shade of pale gray, actually came across as bright white in the context of most period country houses where old colors survive. Another color, Hardwick white, the grayest of all the Farrow and Ball whites, was named as a result of being used throughout the National Trust property Hardwick Hall. No one looking at it on a color chart would ever think of it as white, but in large areas and relative to the dark tapestries of Hardwick, it looked very different. In fact, it looked white. Farrow and Ball concluded, whiteness is always a matter of degree, and can only be judged by the colors surrounding it. Truth is the same. As in the sold anecdote in Chapter 8, we see that the only way of posing the question to obtain a relevant and meaningful answer is to put it in the context of the current circumstances and occasion. Similarly, the only way to determine the accurate truth of any condition, situation, event, concept or reality is by placing it in relationship to the background of its context. So, if dowsing has a limitation, it is as a consequence of the fact that we can only ask questions from the standpoint of our individual level of awareness and our resulting ability to place the questions that we ask in context. But if all truth is relative, and is only relevant as truth when it is in context, how, as dowsers, can we pursue absolute truth? The more that I work with truth, the more I understand that truth is not a purely fact-based concept but a state of awareness, and therefore a way of being. It cannot be acquired, searched for or procured. It cannot be found out there, only within. Truth is found in the consciousness within all of us. So it is found within you. It manifests as a consequence of what you have become and the principles with which you align yourself. And the simple stark fact is, the higher your level of consciousness, the higher your alignment will be with the state of truth or divinity and, as a result, the more accurate your dowsing will be. Access to truth will always be a reflection of where we are in our state of awareness. And any growth in our awareness, by definition, requires a change of consciousness. We should not view this with discouragement or impatience, but embrace it as a gift to help us understand where we are in the process and, in turn, embrace the opportunity to grow. We each have the option to choose to align ourselves with the highest principles, to strive to fulfill the highest possible vision of ourselves and to endeavor to be kind, loving and compassionate to all forms of life, including our own. And as we grow in consciousness and awareness, we are given access to higher levels of universal consciousness, or perhaps, more accurately, as a consequence of this growth we are able to align with these higher levels. Having access to information is a very powerful tool, a tool that begs to be used with discretion, diplomacy, good judgment, wisdom, compassion and, most critically, the best interests of the recipient at heart. Never attempt to use this tool from a position of ego, with a self-congratulatory pat on the back or with the self-delusion that you have a unique and exclusive power. Instead, develop a healthy respect and gratitude for the source with which you are able to connect. Ultimately, if you have a truly open mind and come from a position of humility, you can't go far wrong. How accurate is dowsing? The process of dowsing has the potential to be 100% accurate. As a consequence of its very existence, the complete knowingness of the all-encompassing, infinite field of the universe can never be wrong. If anything, as we have seen, it is the dowser's interface with that field that will compromise the accuracy. So a far more pertinent question would be, how accurate are dowsers? As in any profession where a unique combination of skills is required to consistently achieve outstanding results, acting, music, writing, football, teaching, athletics, cooking, there are few really good professional dowsers. This reflects the number of elements to be mastered in professional dowsing: focus of intention and attention, emotional detachment, clear questioning, a physically, emotionally and mentally balanced body, unquestioning belief in the process, an in-depth knowledge of the field of expertise, a high level of consciousness or awareness and the complete absence of ego. And, in addition, years of sometimes exhausting, occasionally embarrassing, often exhilarating, but always hard-won practical experience. This is all something to aspire to, but the giants of dowsing, such as George Applegate and Abbe Alexis Bouley, are testimony to the fact that it can be done. Achieving accuracy in personal dowsing is much more immediate and accessible. You don't have to study a field of speciality to achieve good results, your field of speciality is you. Simply believe that you can do it, formulate accurate questions, build your confidence with practice, keep an open mind, and enjoy the process. All dowsers find something different. This oft-repeated phrase is sometimes used by dowers in their own defense, and sometimes seized on by skeptics as a criticism. It is a rather irritating generalization, nonetheless it is frequently true, and true for several reasons. The inconsistent or diverse findings by those dowsing on the same project or subject often result from the fact that they are a. Asking different questions, or b. Asking questions from a different perspective. There is an ancient fable that perfectly illustrates this predicament. Similar versions of the tale exist in several religions, including Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, and although the story varies slightly from version to version, the underlying message is the same. 6 blind men are gathered together and are asked to examine an elephant to determine what it looks like. Each of them touches the elephant's body and describes it. One blind man touches its leg and declares it to be a pillar, one feels its tail and says it is a rope, one feels its trunk and pronounces it to be a tree branch, one touches its tusk and says it is a spear, one feels its ear and declares it to be a hand fan, and the last one feels its back and believes it to be a throne. They then share their conclusions, believing they have touched the whole of the elephant, and find they are all in disagreement. A wise man then explains to them that they are in fact all correct, and the reason that they have come to different conclusions is that they all touched a different part. In actuality, of course, the elephant has all the features identified. Dowsing is often the same. Depending on training, context, belief systems and spheres of experience, dowsers will invariably ask questions corresponding to these parameters, all possibly relevant, but all from an individual perspective. Hence, like the blind men, all dowsers can find something different. If there were an occasion where a group of dowsers asked an identical 10 questions, however, then there would be a higher probability of their reaching the same conclusions. I say probability, rather than certainty, as each individual dowser would still interpret the answers obtained within the limitations of their own level of understanding. A second reason why all dowsers find something different is because in many fields of dowsing application there is no universally agreed pre-established terminology. Water divining has been in existence long enough to have formulated a common terminology, but in the fields of earth energies, environmental energies, biofield energies and subtle energies, the nomenclature is still in its infancy. There is little or no recognized agreement, and it is down to individual understanding and interpretation. One woman's positive energy line is another woman's ley line, one man's discarnate entity is another man's ghost. Not only are we working with a movable feast in terms of vocabulary and classification, but in the dowsing process we are also attempting to translate the language of the intangible world of energy and consciousness and portray it in a meaningful and constructive context in the world of matter. Although there are undoubtedly areas of correlation, a cautious approach is prudent, as these energies often have scant proof of existence, especially from mainstream science, and can be elusive in their definition, especially within the context of the bigger picture. As with geopathic stress, it is perhaps easier to observe the effects of an imbalance of energy rather than it is to define and label, with absolute unerring certainty, the source of the imbalance. Once a terminology to portray the realms of consciousness and subtle energies has been categorized and established on a formal basis, I suspect the margin of error for dowsers finding something different will decrease. In the meantime, all dowsers find something different highlights the challenge that potential clients can face when attempting to source and hire a dowser. In order to obtain optimal results, for both dowser and client, it is crucial that there exists mutual trust and confidence. For anyone thinking of instructing a dowser, my best advice is to take guidance from a professional dowsing body or follow up on personal recommendations from friends, neighbors, or colleagues. Having selected a potential dowser, familiarize yourself with their track record, take the time to read their testimonials and ask to speak to one or two of their recent clients. Ensure that they use a methodology with which you are comfortable, whether it be working on site or at a distance. And ask them about any specific approach or slant they have in their specialist field. Don't be afraid to ask probing questions, even ones you feel might sound naive. Any experienced dowser will answer them with patience until you are fully satisfied. and most dowsers are more than delighted to talk about their favorite subject. Source. In the early days of my teaching, whilst giving an environmental energy seminar in Ireland, I began with a practical demonstration of information dowsing, asking questions and obtaining answers from my dowsing rods. I had been in full flow for at least 45 minutes when towards the back of the room I spotted a hand in the air. There was a pregnant pause and then, in a lilting Irish accent, a woman struggled, but, pointing to the rods, "Who are you talking to?" My flow came to an abrupt halt. It could have been funny, but it wasn't, because with one simple question she had hit on the fundamental key to the whole dowsing process. As we have seen, when we are dowsing, the source of our information is the universal information field, or the A field of Dr. Irvin Laszlo. But sometimes it is not quite that simple, because the field is made up of many dimensions and levels of complexity far beyond our understanding. In a simplistic model, the extending of our consciousness to access this information field is similar to our being a radio transmitter and receiver. On a radio, we tune into a specific bandwidth and station. We pick up a particular signal and we are able to access the information being broadcast. Generally, we expect the signal to be clear and easily audible. Sometimes, however, radio stations are very close together and you can hear two stations broadcasting simultaneously. And sometimes pirate broadcasters or ham radio operators cut in and interfere with reception, disrupting legal radio transmissions. Occasionally, the signal is faint and hard to hear, full of crackle and interference or alarming whoops and whistles. Certainly, whilst listening on a car radio, irritating mobile phone and communication mast blips will frequently drown out a broadcast. On the rare occasion, a police frequency will even cut in, the transmitted message startling in its blast. Tuning in to pick up a dowsing signal can be exactly the same. Occasionally your line-off communication will be disrupted by unwanted outside interference, otherwise known as gremlins in the works. If in the process of dowsing you are obtaining answers that just don't make sense or don't feel quite right, or if your intuition is prodding you with an uneasy niggling feeling, always go with your intuition. Either put down your dowsing tool, walk away and take a break for an hour, or if, and only if, you feel comfortable, pursue a line of questioning to identify the reason why. Is there interference with my dowsing? Is this interference benevolent? Is this interference malevolent? Is it in my best interests to cease dowsing? For how long? More than an hour? 2 hours? The only caution with this line of questioning is that the very interference you are inquiring about will have the potential to distort these answers as well. An alternative way to identify the reliability of your dowsing answers is to calibrate the source of your information. In circumstances such as these, perhaps the most reliable way is to use Dr. David Hawkins' map of consciousness, which is published in most of his books. If your source calibrates at less than 200, then you know you are dowsing below the level of truth and your answers will be undependable and inaccurate. If there is no outside interference with your dowsing and you are satisfied that the source of your information is reliable, then identify whether the glitch is within yourself. Suggestions for questions include: am I in the right frame of mind to dowse? Are my intentions clear to dowse? Am I too tired/unwell/stressed to dowse clearly and accurately? Is my emotional state currently detrimental to the accuracy of my dowsing? Am I affecting the accuracy of my dowsing with any unwanted mental or emotional input? Is it in my best interests to cease dowsing for my own protection? Sometimes there is no obvious, logical or rational answer as to why our dowsing tools refuse to cooperate. For short periods, it may simply not be the right time to dowse. On one occasion, upon commencing dowsing for the day, I found that all my rods would produce was nonsensical rambling. I ran through the list of obvious questions, checking as to why, and every answer was in the negative. Out of sheer frustration, I shouted, "Well, is the universe on a coffee break then?" To my amusement, the answer was a very strong yes. Thankfully, half an hour later, it was back to work. So, if you get stuck or are unsure how to go on, make a sensible decision on how to proceed. Ask for help from another trusted dowser or a trained, experienced energy worker. Your best protection from unwanted interference is to always ensure that you yourself are in alignment with the highest level of truth and not allow yourself to resonate in any way with lower level fields of thought. Grounding yourself is also essential, of course, both to maintain an even and balanced flow of energy throughout the body's chakra system and to prevent a destabilizing short circuit of energy throughout the upper chakras. Over time this can be exhausting to the physical body. But attempts to protect yourself with barriers should be treated with caution. Dr. Valerie Hunt comments.
Some people, when they do this kind of work, wrap themselves in white light as a sort of protection. These ideas about black and white energy need to be clarified. Actually, energy is energy. We, on the other hand, judge the information by our worth and standards, so that the blackness and whiteness is our judgment. It has nothing to do with energy per se. For those reasons, I do not wrap myself in white light when I work. I am protected by the strength, clarity and spiritual vibrations of my field. I am therefore free to interact with whatever I choose and to radiate my coherent energy to the world and to all people.
So your alignment with truth should be your one and only intention, and this in turn will ultimately be your principal protection. Conversely, if your intent is to obtain information to cause harm to others or any form of life, by opening the door of negative intent you will become the magnet to all the dodgy energies out there in the universe. If you are using your dowsing rods or pendulum as a communication tool to access specific guides, protectors or other persona and thought forms that exist in the various dimensions outside the physical plane, by all means go ahead and have a chat with them and ask for their opinions. But again, proceed with caution. You might get some fascinating insights from an ancient guru or Auntie Edna who died in 1910. Just don't blindly rely on them for the highest level of truth. It would be astute to calibrate them as a source of information first. When you have been employing your dowsing skills for some time and your alignment with the conscious universe becomes more coherent, you may begin to notice certain changes. When posing a question, you may find that you suddenly know the answer before your dowsing tool responds. Please do not automatically assume that this is a result of your imagination, that you made it up or preempted or influenced your dowsing tool to move in a particular direction. Your intuitive process is just becoming more coherent, so the moment a question takes form in your mind, an answer is there for you, with the physical process of the dowsing tool response taking a second or two longer. How does this happen? Having asked a dowsing question, you stand aside as the observer to await the answer, thus creating space between thoughts. It is this space between thoughts that those who meditate aim for when they put aside the chattering conscious mind. Soon, with practice, whether you are meditating or dowsing, the spaces merge together and become a continuous flow of consciousness. You are now connecting with Source. It is at this point that you will no longer need your dowsing tool. It is at this point that you will just know. You may even find that the dowsing response or the knowingness is accompanied by fleeting images, impressions or strong feelings. Key words may start to come into your mind, or you may hear prompts or ideas, or even phrases or sentences. This is all simply a result of your stepping aside and allowing the flow of consciousness into your mind field. And if your dowsing tool starts to do something out of the ordinary, take heed. One of the defining moments of my dowsing career was when my dowsing rods gave their first independent proactive demonstration. I was with a client and her husband in their charming 400-year-old Surrey cottage and deeply immersed in a health consultation. She had suffered for many years with chronic fatigue syndrome, and they intuitively felt that there was something very wrong with the cottage. I was in the process of identifying at exactly what point the breakdown of her immune function had initially occurred, and in answer to the questions my L-rods were swinging to and from their usual yes and no positions, when abruptly they stopped and, as the three of us watched in totally fascinated silence, began a very specific and precise movement, 1 revolution to the left. Stop. 1 revolution to the right. Stop. 1 revolution to the left. Stop. 1 revolution to the right. Stop. After this had continued for a minute or two, I told my, thankfully very open-minded, clients that it appeared I was being given a message. The moment I observed verbally that the movement of the rods was akin to the sweep of a radar screen, they rapidly responded with a very emphatic yes. In fact, I quickly established that I was under active surveillance from a third party, perhaps akin to being on someone's radar screen, attention that I had certainly not solicited and definitely did not want. I choose not to disclose who the third party was, but I took appropriate measures for my own protection and to safeguard that of my clients, as their confidentiality and privacy were my primary concerns. I was, however, extremely grateful for the alert I was given. This was just the first of many occasions when my rods have given me proactive and invaluable feedback, sometimes for my benefit and sometimes for the benefit of my clients. Inventive and resourceful, they will swing and point to objects, locations, parts of the body, in fact to anything that might bring further knowledge or insight or give clues to critical information I may not have identified in my questioning process. This often enthralling display has been witnessed by many and frequently inspires awe and delight as the rods dance with grace and joy, revealing, in a tangible way, our connection with an intelligent and benevolent cosmos. Any proactive feedback you receive will be a sign of an evolving awareness, an affirmation of your growing willingness to step aside, let go of ego and allow the process of transformation. This will lead to the experiencing of a profound interconnectedness with other human beings, with nature and with all life. Above all, never assume anything. Dowsing is an adventure where something new can be learned every day, and a totally open heart and mind will give you your greatest opportunity to learn, grow and evolve. The remaining factor to ensuring the successful application of your dowsing skills is identifying your niche. This aspect of the overall adventure merits a chapter all of its own. End of chapter 16.